The point is that the film ended up being essentially a sacrificial lamb, used as a symbol representing diversity on the whole. And while those fears are mainly held by the worst of the harassment-committing bigots we talked about earlier, those average Joes who just didn't like a not very good movie are, in fact, a crucial part of this whole equation. They are where the battle is. This is the phenomenon of sacrificial trash. In effect, sacrificial trash refers to a piece of media that, 1, prominently features creators or characters of a marginalized identity, be it from gender, race, disability, sexuality, or a combination thereof. 2 is not especially good, and 3 faces a large, wide-scale public backlash in which it is largely considered to be terrible trash. And what essentially happens here is that hatred for this one given piece of media becomes a convenient proxy to direct a backlash against general concepts like diversity or women creating things. Oftentimes, the creators behind these projects are subject to a heavy amount of horrible abuse, some of which is incredibly overt in its bigotry, and some of which has the veneer of plausible deniability. I'm not sending Halle Bailey death threats on Instagram because she's a woman of color. I just don't like her singing and think she's in a bad movie. But more broadly than that, you'll see things like review bombing, massive amounts of social media outrage, and oftentimes a cottage industry of YouTube and nowadays also TikTok accounts churning out content against this media. I think, though, that a crucial trait of sacrificial trash is that these backlashes are often picked up outside the insular circles of the most dedicated bigots that exist online. Indeed, the biggest vector for the spread of these backlash campaigns and what ultimately pushes them into becoming self-sustaining are not people with usernames like FemoidHater2003, it's your average well-meaning viewers who just don't like a thing and want to be entertained. I could use a pretty wide variety of films and TV shows here to highlight my point. I've already talked about live-action Disney remakes, Ghostbusters, we could talk about things like the new Doctor Who seasons, or the new She-Hulk show, or the Charlie's Angels remake, but one example that I really want to use as a case study is that cartoon I mentioned earlier, High Guardian Spice. I watched the whole thing over a couple days with Emily and found its role in broader pop culture incredibly interesting. Because while it's indeed not very good, the way online discourse about the show has been shaped is incredibly telling. For those not in the know, High Guardian Spice is a 12-episode animated series meant to be anime mega giant Crunchyroll's first foray into original programming. Well, it would have been had it actually come out on time. High Guardian Spice met so much controversy from the moment that it was announced that there's compelling evidence that Crunchyroll held back on releasing the series because of the intense amount of backlash it received. And intense is the proper way to describe it. Simply typing in the series name on YouTube will show you hundreds of videos with millions of views all talking about how bad the series is, some of them from the same channels who seem to do nothing but criticize the show to the point where their collective content against the series is longer than the series itself. You'll see compilations of the show's worst moments focused on various different topics and subject matter. Essentially, people online really hate this show. A show must be extremely bad to get this much coverage and receive this much vitriol. And this is precisely why works that get trapped in the greater culture war can be frustrating. Because here's the thing. High Guardian Spice is a bad show, it's just not a bad show for the reasons why people are mad at it. The central premise of this series is about 4 kids who go to a magic school, which, as far as premises go, isn't the worst. Like, someone could probably do something interesting with that. Hey, listen to Trials and Trebuchets! It's the D&D podcast I do with my friends. We're also 4 kids at a magical school. What's up? Theoretically, there's more to the premise than that. The mom of lead character Rosemary was apparently some great warrior who went missing years ago. There's some sort of big bad plan going on that's very unclear. For the most part, though, the majority of the 12 episodes are spent just doing magical school stuff. That's sort of the crux of the problem. For the most part, High Guardian Spice is a subpar, trope-filled slice-of-life cartoon, spending way too much time on episodes that were probably meant to be fun character development romps, but instead come off as filler before trying hard to cram some form of plot into the final few episodes. The world building bounces between generic and non-existent, it's a very low-budget affair, and it shows with some kinda awkward animation and voice acting that ranges from acceptable to incredibly unprofessional.
The Rune of Destruction can have many meanings, including...
Mr. Caraway?
It's Professor, yes?
What's a rune?
The characters are flat, either being basic archetypes or only getting enough screen time to be defined by singular emotions. Like, oh, here's the quick one, the sad one, the fun one, the mean one. In the entirety of the show, the only character I had any affection for was Slime Boy, and that's only because he's just a delightful little weird dude with a performance that makes you unsure if his actor is a genius or if he just has a really bad microphone.
I got caught with ink legs in my dorm once. You know inkles? They're slimy. Anyway, sorry. I just came in here to cry, but I...
Each episode starts with a content warning about explicit violence and language, but besides some various uses of the word shit and some early Naruto levels of blood toward the end of the series, there's not much to distinguish it from a kids' TV show, forced moral at the end of every episode and everything, which makes the content warning more and more ill-fitting and funny as the show goes on.
Content warning! Are you ready to get fucked up? This show is gonna be so edgy, it's gonna blow your tits right off!
Because of the number of characters, episodes tend to not just have A and B plots, but C and D plots as well, making them confusing to watch, plots hard to decipher, and nothing getting the proper attention it should. It's a very not good show. But the problem is that I can't just simply say that High Guardian Spice is a bad show, because even just acknowledging online that I don't like it is playing into the very overblown backlash that is stuck with the series. While some people online dislike High Guardian Spice for this reason, the fact is that people were against the show before any of these aspects were even known, before people had even seen the show, when all they had to go off of was a 2-minute trailer and some work-in-progress storyboards. It all comes back to that original announcement video that dropped in 2019. The video showcased several creative talents working on the show, giving only a simple summary before moving on to talking about the diversity behind the scenes on the show. How the series was developed by a trans man, how it's written by an entirely female writer's room, how the crew is 50% female.
Our characters are really diverse, our cast is really diverse, and that's one of the things that excited me the most about it.
We are 50% female in all the creative roles, and our writer's room is 100% female. I mean, this is what my whole career has been about, is trying to get those voices in there that are not being heard.
I have to be honest when I say that this is a bad trailer, or at least a bad announcement trailer. The fact that it is so nothing with very little to show for itself besides just talking about the behind-the-scenes stuff doesn't really generate a lot of interest. I think it's something even the staff who worked on the show would agree on and didn't necessarily want their show marketed this way. The trailer isn't great. But of course, the trailer wasn't allowed to be just not great. People on the internet lost their fucking minds. The emphasis on diversity in the trailer was like a siren to the chuds of the internet. Doubly so because this was an original Western-developed animated series released on an anime-centric streaming platform, and one with a CalArts-esque style too. Back when this was still a thing people cared. Do people still care about the whole like CalArts thing? I don't know. I haven't heard that in a while, but I might just be hanging out in the right circles. Anyway, this was happening right when there was a pushback towards that style of animation because of Thundercats Roar, which experienced a similar backlash, though not one as long-lasting as High Guardian Spice's. Outraged people online began latching on to any part of the production they could to raise a fit, making dozens upon dozens of videos, harassing the writers, dragging out old tweets and messages to show that random people working on it hated men, and using it to signal the fall of anime and animation as a whole. When Crunchyroll quietly dropped all 12 episodes online 2 years after that initial trailer, the backlash got even worse. By this point, High Guardian Spice had already obtained the reputation online of being a show that looked bad and generic and was all about diversity, and that it was bad because it was all about diversity. And when the show finally came out, that preconceived bias was then used by people online to fuel rage towards the very existence of the series. Of course, a show that just happens to feature diversity and experiences backlash is not in and of itself sacrificial trash. You know, it doesn't make the backlash inherently like transphobic or anything of that nature. And I think the vast majority of people clicking on these little clips probably don't hold any intentional negative sentiments in that regard. They just want to look at their recommendations and laugh about some bad voice acting. It takes a second of searching to find the real root of all of this. When you look at a site like IMDb and go through the reviews for this show, a couple phrases start popping up on the regular. Politics, political, forced politicking, which is interesting because this is a decidedly not very political show. Fucking Owl House is legitimately more political than this. And then you go on their Facebook page and look at the comments and you start seeing triggered memes and comments like woke garbage. And then you look at how a large number of these videos are all from the same channel, a guy called Guardian HQ who has put out 175 of these things and is still at it even now. And then you join their Discord server and see a million posts about how the show hates men and is anti-male propaganda and is biased against anyone who isn't trans, and you're like, alright, this isn't just about the animation and writing, is it? At least not on the parts of the largest producers of anti-High Guardian Spice content, from whom most of this cultural backlash is directly originating. Going through these videos and comments is wild because so many of them are, again, talking about how the show has such forced diversity, how it's filled with characters defined by nothing but their race, how it hates men and portrays all of them as assholes or incompetent, or how it cares more about pushing an LGBTQ agenda than it does telling a good story. All of these critiques are interesting because none of them are actually true. Let's address this bit by bit. The characters in High Guardian Spice do vary a lot in race, yes, both in the D&D race sense and also just in the sense that there's a variety of skin colors out there. But to say that these characters are defined by their race is blatantly wrong. At no point is race a factor in the story at all, skin color never comes up, and no big deal is ever made about certain characters being different races. Indeed, despite a pretty diverse cast of background characters, most of the leads are white, and the characters that are not have never had that fact pointed out or made into a story element. In fact, it's strange because so often in online discourse, you hear people say how they don't have a problem with people of color being in media, they just want them to exist in the world rather than be forced into it or for it to be a focal point. And yet, when High Guardian Spice does exactly that, they still say that the existence of non-white characters is forced diversity. So it becomes very clear very quickly that what these people actually mean is that they don't want non-white characters in their stories. Now let's move on to the supposed misandry and negative portrayal of male characters. The main example for this that you see online in essays and montages are two characters, Aster and Cal. Aster is a character who appears in only a single episode of the series, being introduced as a cool crush for Rosemary before he gradually reveals himself to be more and more of a mean himbo, a sort of Gaston type, if you will.
I have a lot to learn about myself and how girls look cute when they climb walls and stuff.
People get really mad because the episode ends with a hammer being dropped on his foot and everyone laughing, which is apparently promoting violence against men, which, okay, sure, Wile E. Coyote dropping an anvil on himself is also promoting discrimination against coyotes. Next is Cal, who is actually voiced by ProZD, which is just kind of interesting. Cal is a classmate who appears a few times and is transphobic to one of the characters, Snapdragon, who spends the series going through gender exploration.
Dude, why are you dressed like a girl? This is messed up.
So by this logic, the show is anti-man because it has an asshole character appear in one episode and has a recurring bully character who isn't even the main bully character in the series. The main bully character of the series is in fact a woman, and while she has some softening moments, she is very clearly meant to be unlikable and someone to be rooted against.
Hey! Oops.
Of course, this take also ignores the various positive portrayals of men in the series, from the young Parnell to the all-time great slime boy to the kind blacksmith teacher or the martial arts teacher. The series actually manages to portray both its female and male characters well, and while the cast might skew a bit toward the female side, that's really not uncommon in the sort of magical girl series High Guardian Spice is clearly taking inspiration from. The only reason why someone would think this series is anti-men is either because they don't want to see any male characters portrayed negatively ever, or more realistically, they came in with the preconception that the show was going to be anti-men and latched onto any crumb that gave even the littlest hint of misandry solely to drive up outrage online. Now for the apparent LGBTQ content that this show apparently shoved down all these people's throats. When it comes to gay stuff, it's basically nothing. Like, the gay stuff is there. There's a lesbian couple that houses the leads in 1 or 2 episodes. At least one of the leads is confirmed to like girls, and that's basically it. The gay stuff is just that a couple gay people exist. Once again, like the race thing, it's actually doing that thing of just letting characters be gay without making a big deal about it, and when people complain about its presence in the show, it really just reveals that they don't want gay people in their media at all. There is also the trans aspect of the show, which is a bit more complicated and definitely the one social justice leftist thing the show actually does try to send a message on. There are 2 canonical trans characters in the show, Professor Caraway, a trans man portrayed by the show's creator, and the aforementioned Snapdragon, whose main story arc in the first season is coming to terms with her gender and leading up to potentially finally coming out as a girl and transitioning to a woman. Of the 2, Caraway is definitely the weaker character. His voice acting isn't great, which in turn makes his scenes come off as generally kinda awkward.
Lavender and I met when we were students here together, our first year.
His big trans scene is one where he's talking to Rosemary about being friends with her mom and showing Rosemary old pictures he had with her from before he transitioned, and then explaining to Rosemary, who had never heard of the term transgender before, what that means and how he has to use magic every month to keep this form.
You are a girl?
I'm transgender.
I don't know that word.
I was born into a female body, but it wasn't the right body for me. So I used new magic to change it.
It's an awkwardly written moment, if I'm allowed to be honest, as it does feel like a pause in an unrelated conversation to explain gender identity, followed by Rosemary jumping straight back into talking to her mom without really reacting to the information Caraway just gave her about himself. It's a scene that has good intentions, but definitely needed to be reworked a lot more. Snapdragon has more blatantly trans content, and quite honestly, it's pretty good. It helps that it's the one character arc that the show seems to actually care about developing as time goes on, and there's a genuine sense of progression. From Snapdragon expressing discomfort at getting lumped in with boys, to using Halloween as an excuse to experiment with gender presentation, to getting frustrated at her own body and how it's not what she wants to be and how she wishes she could socialize with girls, and finally to learning that she actually could transition if she wanted to and be happy in a frankly much better Caraway scene where a trans elder gets the chance to help an egg see it would be okay to come out.
I want smooth skin and smaller hands, and I don't know, it's like the girls, they look so strong and beautiful as mermaids. I want to be a warrior like that.
Snapdragon, listen.
You say I can change paths, but it's not like I can just stop being a guy.
As someone who has a co-writer that's a trans woman who is also writing all of this, if it isn't obvious, I don't know if I should put on the beanie or not, Snapdragon's journey felt very similar to what it actually felt like, managing to touch on a lot of the fear and anger and sadness and eventual joy that comes through going through the gender discovery process. Quite honestly, despite the show being bad and more than likely never getting any form of follow-up content, there is a part of me being Emily, who is sort of disappointed that Snapdragon's story won't get followed up on, as it's one of the better trans narratives I've ever seen explored in an animated medium. So yeah, when it comes to trans stuff, we have an awkward character and the only arc in the show that's actually compelling, so balances out to not really being worth getting mad at unless you just hate trans people, which yeah, many of these people do. And the weird thing is that despite how not good the show is, it's not even that remarkably not good. Like, the animation is bad and the story is generic, but like, the animation isn't that bad. Like, it's closer to early Dragon Ball Super than it is to Berserk 2016, and the story still has the same issue with tropes and filler that something like Ruby had in its first season. Frankly, I think that if High Guardian Spice had been made by a Japanese studio with basically the exact same script with the same level of animation flaws, it probably would have been liked by many of the people online who claim to hate it. And the people thinking this is one of the worst shows ever and that it's killing animation probably wouldn't even notice if it came out on something like Disney XD or Netflix or whatever, where it probably should have always been. At the end of the day, High Guardian Spice is a mediocre series that got a reputation for being some terrible, awful sin to animation solely because it came out of the gate showcasing its diverse talent and people decided to pounce in response. And one of the problems once people start pouncing is that even the animals walking alongside the stampede inadvertently become part of the herd. By acknowledging that the show is flawed, by admitting that I find it bad, am I not just contributing to the same hostile campaign that the staff has had to deal with the whole time? What do you do when you can't engage in content without also becoming part of the culture war that content has become immersed in? I mean, this even extends to passive viewing of this content as well. Part of the thing about campaigns like this is that even if it may be obvious that a work is getting brigaded by intolerant internet people, it's easy to get swept up in it just by engaging in online criticism. It's easy to passively click on a video titled something like "The Failure of Channel Awesome's Demo Reel" because there's a sense of fun in seeing someone rip apart something or talk about something bad. A fair bit of you first came to this channel because you wanted to see me talk shit about something like Insatiable or Supernatural. Oftentimes, the overt bigotry of these campaigns isn't necessarily well hidden, but may take a few moments to reveal itself, so the average viewer could watch a bunch of High Guardian Spice takedown videos just out of morbid curiosity about this show they've heard is a disaster and not really realize what's going on. And by the time they do, the damage is already done, and the creator of the video has increased their metrics and analytics, which then increases both their profits and their potential reach. In other words, most of the people bolstering this backlash are just normies or casuals or whatever you want to call them, but it is engineered by bigots to, 1, direct the negative attention of public opinion toward marginalized creators, and 2, create larger backlashes against the concept of diversity. This not only serves a broader point in the discourse, but has an intimidating effect against other creators who might be afraid to showcase their work in the future. What I think is especially important to note here is the fact that the people orchestrating these larger unfounded backlashes against, say, woman-dominated shows for being woman-dominated do not really care about the quality of these works, right? The people falsely claiming High Guardian Spice is cisphobic or something had always planned to deride it for that, regardless of the show's quality, because the ringleaders behind these backlashes generally do not like women and generally do not like queer people. This Is a Bad Movie is not the root cause behind these backlashes. Rather, they are a convenient excuse. If these people could, they would do this to everything that is diverse, because they don't believe women and queer people and people of color should be able to create without fear. It's just that the bad stuff, or even the mediocre stuff, is where this kind of backlash works, because that is where regular people who just want to watch a fun YouTube video about a bad show can then be weaponized to participate in it. And we know this is true because we've watched these people attempt similar campaigns against diverse media that is good. It just doesn't stick as often.